All right, let's talk about South Florida's real estate market because honestly, it's a total puzzle right now. You see these headlines screaming boom, but then you hear whispers of some pretty serious trouble brewing. So, what's the real story? We're going to figure it out. Let's get into it. Okay, first things first, you have to see this number. It is a real jaw dropper, a whopping 14% increase in new housing permits in South Florida just in the first half of 2025. I mean, on the surface, that sounds incredible, right? Like the market's just on fire. But here's what makes that 14% number so wild. It's all about the context. See, while South Florida was taking off, the rest of the U.S. was actually slowing down. National permits dropped by 2%. So South Florida isn't just growing, it's literally going against the grain, doing the exact opposite of pretty much the entire country. So yeah, let's dig into this building boom. We really need to get past that big, flashy number and see what's actually going on underneath, because this is where the story starts to get, well, a lot more interesting. And right away, we see the first crack in the story. This boom is pretty much just a Miami-Dade story. They're building like crazy, almost 14 new units for every 1,000 homes. But then you look next door. Palm Beach is at a half that speed, and Broward County, barely a quarter of that. So this isn't some big regional boom, it's hyper-localized. And that's creating a real risk of housing shortages for everyone else. Which brings us to a really strange paradox. Even with all those permits getting filed in Miami, there are some major signs that the whole development machine is starting to grind to a halt. An industry insider I saw quoted put it perfectly, and pretty dramatically. He just said, "The world turned." And that really says it all, doesn't it? It captures this feeling of a sudden, sharp change in the market's mood. All that easy money and crazy optimism from the past few years, yeah, that's over. So this leads us to the central mystery we're trying to solve here. If things are so great that developers are filing for all these permits, why on earth are so many of them just selling the land? They're getting projects totally ready to go, shovel ready as they say, and then just walking away before a single shovel hits the dirt. What is going on? Well, it comes down to what you could call a trifecta of trouble. One, interest rates have shot through the roof, so getting a construction loan is insanely expensive. Two, the cost of materials and labor is still sky high. And three, this is the real kicker. That explosive rent growth that made everything look so profitable, it's finally cooling off. For a lot of these projects, the math just doesn't work anymore. But here's a twist. Not everyone is selling because they're in trouble. We're seeing a new kind of player in the game, the land banker. These are really smart investors. They buy a piece of land, use new state laws like the Live Local Act to get it approved for way more apartments than before, and then they flip that entitled land to a builder for a massive profit. Their plan was never to build a thing. So that's the supply side. Now we gotta look at the other half of the equation, demand. If developers are getting squeezed, who is keeping this market afloat? And the answer shows us just how divided this market truly is. Just take a second and look at this number. 90%. In some of the big new condo projects in places like Brickell and Miami, it's estimated that 90% of the buyers are investors. Let me say that again. They are not people who are looking for a home to live in. So who are they? Well, the new condo market is just completely dominated by international money, and a huge slice of that is coming from Latin America. For them, Miami real estate is a safe harbor, a stable place to put their money away from any economic or political chaos back home. And what does that mean for the buildings themselves? It means developers are building specifically for these investors. We're seeing brand new condo towers designed from the ground up to basically act like hotels, with super flexible rules for short-term rentals. So a massive part of the so-called new housing supply isn't for residents at all. It's for tourists. And you can probably guess what happens next. This creates a huge spillover effect. With so much of Miami's new housing being used for Airbnb, and with prices staying so high, local renters are getting pushed out. So where do they go? They're heading north, flooding into Broward County, and specifically Fort Lauderdale. And the data on this is just staggering. A recent analysis found that Fort Lauderdale is now the single most competitive place to rent an apartment in the entire state of Florida. It's number 20 in the whole country. And Miami isn't even in the top 50 anymore. With occupancy rates pushing past 96%, Fort Lauderdale has become a pressure cooker for renters. Okay, so amidst all of this chaos, what's it like for the people who actually own homes and live there? Well, their entire mindset is changing in a really fundamental way. Just a few years ago, the dream was all about cosmetics, getting a new kitchen, renovating the bathroom. But now, the new reality is all about defense. The number one most desired upgrade today is a new hurricane-rated roof. The focus has shifted completely from aesthetics to pure financial survival. And what's driving this? The state's absolutely crippling property insurance crisis. Insurance companies are flat out refusing to cover homes that have older roofs. At the same time, there's a state law that gives you big discounts for having things like impact windows and a strong roof. So a new roof isn't just a nice feature anymore. For a lot of people, it's the only way they can get or even keep their insurance. Wow. So after all of that, is there any good news out there for people who are just trying to buy a home? Well, maybe. There is at least one little glimmer of hope on the horizon. After what felt like forever, mortgage rates are finally starting to ease up. Back in August of 2025, the average 30-year fixed rate dropped to 6.58%. That's the lowest it had been in 10 months. It's not a huge drop, but it's some much-needed relief that might just be enough to help some buyers get back in the game. So that brings us back to our final question. When you piece it all together, a construction boom in just one county, developers who can't afford to build, new homes that are really just for tourists, and an insurance crisis that's forcing homeowners to focus on roofs instead of renovations, can you really call that a boom? Or is this a market that's just becoming dangerously complex and broken? That right there is the South Florida puzzle.